Alexander the Great, the rise of a conqueror. In the ancient world, where empires clashed and heroes were forged in the fires of battle, one name stands above the rest: Alexander the Great. Born in 356 BC in the rugged kingdom of Macedon, he would become a legend whose conquests stretched from the sun-drenched shores of Greece to the distant lands of India. His life was a whirlwind of ambition, brilliance, and mystery, a tale that has captivated the world for centuries. As you settle into the quiet of the night, let us journey back to the dawn of this extraordinary story, where a boy destined for greatness first opened his eyes to a world ripe for conquest. A prince born to rule. Picture a small palace in Pella, the capital of Macedon, where the air is thick with the scent of olive groves and the distant clang of blacksmiths. Here, in the shadow of Mount Olympus, a child was born to King Philip II and his fierce wife, Olympias. They named him Alexander, a name that would one day echo through the halls of history. His father, Philip, was a warrior king who had united the fractious Greek city-states under his iron grip, while his mother whispered tales of gods and heroes, claiming that her son was descended from Achilles himself. From his earliest days, Alexander was surrounded by whispers of destiny, but what path would he carve for himself? As a boy, Alexander was unlike any other. He was restless, his mind sharp as a blade, his spirit untamed. At the age of 12, he tamed a wild horse named Bucephalus, a beast no man could ride. "You must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions," his father once told him, watching in awe as the boy mastered the stallion. And indeed, Alexander's ambitions knew no bounds. His education was entrusted to Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the age, who taught him the arts of logic, science, and rhetoric. But it was the stories of Homer's Iliad that stirred his soul, the glory of battle, the pursuit of eternal fame. What dreams did young Alexander harbor as he gazed at the stars? The shadow of a king. At 16, Alexander's world shifted. His father, King Philip, was away on campaign, and the young prince was left to govern Macedon. It was a test, and he passed with flying colors, quelling a rebellion with a swiftness that belied his years. But his true baptism by fire came at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. There, at just 18, he led the Macedonian cavalry in a daring charge that shattered the enemy lines. The victory was Philip's, but the glory was Alexander's. Yet as father and son stood side by side, a tension simmered. Philip was a giant, but Alexander was a rising sun. How long could two such forces coexist? The answer came in 336 BC, when Philip was assassinated at a wedding feast, his blood staining the floor as chaos erupted. Some whispered that Olympias, ever the schemer, had a hand in it. Others pointed to Persian gold. But Alexander wasted no time on tears. At 20, he seized the throne, his eyes blazing with purpose. He moved swiftly, eliminating rivals and securing the loyalty of the army. The Greek city-states, sensing weakness, rebelled, but Alexander crushed them, razing Thebes to the ground as a warning. His message was clear. The world would bend to his will. What lay ahead for this young king with fire in his veins? The march to Persia. With Greece subdued, Alexander turned his gaze eastward to the vast Persian Empire. It was a colossus, its wealth legendary, its armies endless. But Alexander saw not a titan, but a prize. In 334 BC, He crossed the Hellespont with 35,000 men, his beloved horse Bucephalus at his side. His first test came at the Granicus River, where Persian cavalry charged like a storm. Alexander, ever bold, led from the front, his armor gleaming as he cut through the enemy ranks. The Persians fled, and the gates of Asia swung open. But this was only the beginning. What challenges awaited him deeper in the heart of Persia? At Issus, in 333 BC, Alexander faced Darius III, the Persian king, for the first time. Darius commanded a force many times larger, but Alexander was undaunted. He spotted a weakness in the Persian lines and struck like lightning, driving straight for Darius himself. The king fled, leaving his family behind, a humiliation that would haunt him. Alexander treated the captives with kindness, a gesture that won him respect even among his foes. But the true clash was yet to come. In 331 BC, at Gaugamela, the two armies met in a final showdown. Darius unleashed war chariots and elephants, but Alexander's phalanx held firm. With a brilliant maneuver, he punched through the Persian center, and once again, Darius turned tail. The Persian Empire was his, but what would he do with such power? A king among gods. Alexander's conquests did not stop at Persia. He marched into Egypt, where the people hailed him as a liberator and crowned him pharaoh. At the oracle of Siwa, deep in the desert, he was declared the son of Zeus Ammon, a god among men. His legend grew, but so did his ambition. He founded Alexandria, a city that would become a beacon of knowledge, and set his sights on India. There, in 326 BC, he faced King Porus at the Hydaspes River. The battle was fierce, the monsoon rains turning the ground to mud, but Alexander's genius prevailed. He crossed the river under cover of darkness, surprising Porus and securing victory. Yet, as he stood on the edge of the known world, his soldiers begged to return home. Their weariness was a mirror to his own. What price had his glory exacted? Reluctantly, Alexander agreed. The journey back was a trial by fire. In the Gedrosian desert, his armies stumbled through scorching sands, their lips cracked, their spirits broken. Thousands perished, and Alexander himself nearly died of thirst. It was a humbling reminder that even gods could falter. By 323 BC, he was back in Babylon, his body scarred, his mind restless. He planned new campaigns to Arabia, to Carthage, but fate had other designs. A sudden fever gripped him, and within days he was gone, dead at 32. His last words, when asked to whom he left his empire, were cryptic, to the strongest. And with that, the world he had built began to fracture. Hannibal Barca, the general who defied Rome. In the ancient world, where the clash of swords and the cry of battle echoed across vast empires, one man stood as a thorn in the side of mighty Rome. His name was Hannibal Barca, a general whose brilliance on the battlefield would become the stuff of legend. Born in the sun-soaked city of Carthage, he would grow to challenge the greatest power of his age, leaving a mark on history that time could not erase. As you drift into the quiet of the night, let us journey back to the shores of North Africa, where a boy with a destiny forged in fire first learned the art of war. A son of Carthage. Picture the bustling streets of Carthage in 247 BC, where merchants haggled over spices and silk, and the air was thick with the scent of the sea. Into this world came Hannibal, the eldest son of Hamilcar Barca, a general who had fought Rome in the brutal First Punic War. Hamilcar's defeat left a bitter taste, and he instilled in his son a burning hatred for the Roman Republic. Legend has it that at the age of 9, Hannibal swore an oath to his father, "I will never be a friend to Rome." It was a promise that would shape his life and the fate of nations. As a boy, Hannibal traveled with his father to Spain, where Hamilcar carved out a new Carthaginian stronghold. There, amidst the rugged hills and silver mines, Hannibal learned the ways of war. He trained with the soldiers, his small hands gripping a sword, his eyes wide with wonder. But tragedy struck when Hamilcar drowned in battle, leaving Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal, to lead. When Hasdrubal was assassinated, the army turned to Hannibal, now 26, to take command. His rise was swift, his ambition boundless. But could a young general truly challenge the might of Rome? The oath fulfilled. Hannibal's first act was to secure Spain, his tactical mind already at work. He married a local princess, uniting tribes under his banner, and launched campaigns that filled Carthage's coffers with gold. But his eyes were set on a greater prize, Rome itself. In 218 BC, he made a decision that would echo through history. He would not wait for Rome to strike. He would bring the war to their doorstep. But how? The sea was guarded by Roman ships, the Alps a wall of ice and stone. Hannibal chose the impossible path, over the mountains. With 50,000 men, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, he set out from Spain. The journey was a nightmare of snow, avalanches, and hostile tribes. Elephants slipped on icy paths, men froze in their sleep, and supplies dwindled. Yet Hannibal pressed on, his voice steady, his resolve unbroken. When they finally descended into Italy, only half his army remained, but Rome was caught off guard. The impossible had been achieved. What would Hannibal do with this hard-won advantage? The terror of Italy. Hannibal's arrival sent shockwaves through Rome. He struck first at the Trebia River, luring the Romans into a trap and crushing their legions. Then, at Lake Trasimene, he ambushed another army, the mist hiding his forces until it was too late. But his masterpiece came at Cannae in 216 BC. There, facing 80,000 Romans with just 50,000 men, Hannibal executed a maneuver that would be studied for centuries, the double envelopment. He baited the Romans into attacking his center, then surrounded them with his flanks. By day's end, 70,000 Romans lay dead, their blood soaking the earth. It was a victory for the ages, but could Hannibal sustain it? For 15 years, Hannibal roamed Italy, a ghost haunting Rome's nightmares. He won battle after battle, but the Romans refused to surrender. They adopted a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation, starving his army of resources. Hannibal's pleas for reinforcements from Carthage fell on deaf ears, his allies wavering. Meanwhile, a young Roman general named Scipio Africanus was rising, his eyes set on Carthage itself. The tide was turning. What would be Hannibal's next move? The fall and the flight. In 203 BC, Hannibal was recalled to defend Carthage from Scipio's invasion. At Zama, in 202 BC, the two generals met in a clash that would decide the fate of empires. Hannibal, outnumbered and without his beloved elephants, fought valiantly, but Scipio's tactics mirrored his own. The Carthaginians broke, and for the first time, Hannibal tasted defeat. Carthage sued for peace, its power shattered. But Hannibal's story was far from over. Fearing Roman vengeance, he fled to the courts of Eastern kings, offering his services as a military advisor. He fought in Syria, in Bithynia, always one step ahead of his pursuers. But Rome's reach was long. In 183 BC, cornered in a small town, Hannibal chose his own end. He swallowed poison, his last words defiant. Let us relieve the Romans of their fear. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy was just beginning. Julius Caesar, the rise and fall of Rome's greatest general. In the heart of ancient Rome, where ambition clashed with tradition, Julius Caesar's journey unfolded with unrelenting momentum. A man of intellect and audacity, he carved his name into the annals of history through politics, war, and an unshakable will to dominate. This is no gentle tale. It's a saga of triumph, betrayal, and a legacy that outlived the man himself. Let us plunge into the chaos of his early career, where a young noble dared to defy the odds, a noble's bold beginnings. Born in 100 BC to the Julius, a patrician family of fading prestige, Gaius Julius Caesar entered a Rome teeming with opportunity and danger. The Subura, his childhood home, was a gritty neighborhood where survival demanded wit as much as lineage. At 16, his father's sudden death thrust him into the role of family patriarch, but Caesar was undaunted. With a silver tongue and a fearless spirit, he captivated audiences as an orator and caught the eye of Rome's power brokers. One early tale reveals his mettle. Captured by Cilician pirates while sailing to Rhodes, he laughed in their faces, raised his own ransom through charm, and vowed to return. True to his word, he hunted them down and crucified them, a chilling promise kept. This was no mere boy. This was a man who bent fate to his will. Back in Rome, he aligned with the populares, railing against the aristocratic optimates. His rise gained speed, elected Pontifex Maximus, then governor of Hispania, where he crushed rebellions and filled his coffers. But the consulship, Rome's highest office, loomed as his next conquest. How far would his ambition take him? The Gallic triumph. In 59 BC, Caesar claimed the consulship, but his destiny lay beyond Rome's walls. As governor of Gaul, he launched a campaign that would echo through time. The Gallic Wars were a brutal ballet of strategy and bloodshed, pitting his legions against fierce tribes. His own words in Commentary de Bello Gallico immortalized these feats, blending fact with flair to burnish his legend. From the Rhine to Britain, his armies marched, but it was at Alesia in 52 BC that his genius shone brightest. Facing Vercingetorix, a Gallic king who'd united the tribes, Caesar found himself outnumbered. Undeterred, he built a double ring of fortifications, walls within walls, trapping the enemy between them. When Gallic reinforcements arrived, he repelled them too, shattering their resistance. Vercingetorix surrendered, and Gaul fell to Rome. Caesar returned a hero, his soldiers chanting his name, his wealth overflowing. Yet in Rome, envy festered. Could he wield such power without sparking rebellion? The triumvirate's fragile pact. Caesar's glory rested on a shaky alliance, the first triumvirate with Pompey the Great and Crassus. This trio ruled Rome's shadows, Caesar with his military might, Pompey his prestige, Crassus his gold. It held until Crassus died in 53 BC, and Pompey, once a friend, turned rival. The Senate, wary of Caesar's legions, demanded he disband them and return as a mere citizen. Obedience meant oblivion, defiance meant war. On a fateful night in 49 BC, he stood at the Rubicon, the river dividing Gaul from Italy. With a whispered, Aleicta est, the die is cast, he crossed, igniting civil war. At Pharsalus, his battle-hardened troops routed Pompey's larger army. Pompey fled to Egypt, only to be beheaded by treacherous allies. Caesar pursued, meeting Cleopatra, whose wit matched his own. Their alliance and whispered romance produced Caesarion, binding Egypt to Rome. Victorious, he returned to a senate that bent to his will. In 44 BC, they named him Dictator Perpetuo. But absolute power breeds desperate enemies. What price would he pay? A dictator's vision and doom. As dictator, Caesar remade Rome. He crafted the Julian calendar, a marvel of precision still echoed today. He extended citizenship, eased debts, and dreamed of grand temples. Yet each reform widened the rift with the Senate, who saw a king in all but name, a title Rome despised. Whispers turned to plotting, led by Brutus, his protege, and Cassius, a bitter foe. They called themselves liberators, but their daggers told another story. On March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, Caesar strode into the Senate, oblivious to the trap. As he sat, they closed in, cloaks hiding steel. 23 blows rained down, each a betrayal. Blood pooled at Pompey's statue, where he fell, gazing at Brutus with disbelief. "Et tu, brute," he gasped, or so the tale claims. His death shattered the Republic, birthing an empire from its ashes. Genghis Khan, the conqueror who forged an empire. In the vast, windswept steppes of Central Asia, a legend was rising. Temujin, now known as Genghis Khan, had united the Mongol tribes under his iron will by 1206. His journey from an outcast boy to the universal ruler was paved with blood, loyalty, and unrelenting ambition. But the story of Genghis Khan was far from over. With the tribes forged into a single, disciplined force, he turned his piercing gaze outward toward the great empires that mocked the nomads of the steppe. What followed was a storm of conquest that would reshape the world, leaving a legacy as complex as the man himself. This chapter delves into the height of his power, the brilliance of his strategies, and the shadow of his final days. The machine of war takes shape. Genghis Khan's unification of the Mongols was no mere alliance. It was a revolution. At the Kurultai of 1206, he reshaped his people into a war machine unlike any before. Gone were the days of tribal favoritism. Under his Yasa code, loyalty and skill trumped birthright. A shepherd could command armies if he proved his worth. He organized his warriors into units of 10, 100, 1,000, each a cog in a relentless engine. His horsemen, trained from childhood to ride and shoot, moved with a speed that baffled their enemies. But Genghis Khan was more than a warlord. He was a strategist. He understood the power of fear, the value of intelligence. Spies infiltrated enemy courts, sowing discord before a single arrow flew. He adopted technologies from those he conquered, catapults from China, siege tactics from Persia, turning their strengths against them. His army was a living weapon, honed by the harshness of the steppe and sharpened by his vision. The question loomed, who could stand against such a force? The east falls to the storm. Genghis Khan's first great conquest beyond the steppe came in 1209 against the Xixia dynasty of northwest China. The Xixia had wealth, walls, and arrogance, none of which saved them. His cavalry swept through their lands, cutting supply lines and striking with precision. When their king surrendered, offering tribute and daughters, Genghis Khan accepted, his coffers swelling with silk and silver. But this was merely a prelude. Next, he targeted the Jin dynasty, rulers of northern China. Their capital, Zhongdu, gleamed with golden roofs, a symbol of their might. In 1211, Genghis Khan struck, his army a whirlwind of dust and death. The Jin outnumbered him, their fortifications towering, but he outsmarted them. Feigned retreats drew their forces into ambushes. Relentless sieges starved their cities. By 1215, Zhongdu fell, its streets choked with ash and ruin. The Mongols looted its treasures, and Genghis Khan's name became a curse on the lips of the vanquished. Yet even as he triumphed, his hunger grew. What lay beyond the horizon? The West trembles. The Khwarezmian Empire, a jewel of Central Asia, was next. In 1218, Genghis Khan sought trade, sending envoys with gifts of silk and gold. But the Shah, drunk on pride, insulted the gesture. His governor executed the envoys, shaving their beards as a final humiliation. The steppe erupted. In 1219, Genghis Khan unleashed 200,000 warriors, a tide of vengeance that drowned the Khwarezmian lands. His campaign was a masterclass in war. He split his forces, striking multiple cities at once: Samarkand, Bukhara, Nishapur. The Shah's armies, scattered and confused, crumbled. In Bukhara, Genghis Khan rode into the mosque, declaring himself the scourge of God. Nishapur felt his full wrath. After a Mongol general fell, he ordered every man, woman, and child slaughtered, their skulls piled into pyramids. The Shah fled, hunted across deserts until he died, broken and alone. By 1223, the empire was dust, its riches feeding the Mongol machine. Genghis Khan's dominion now spanned oceans. But at what cost? The man behind the myth. Who was this conqueror? To his people, he was a father, stern but just. He rewarded loyalty with riches, punished betrayal with death. To his enemies, he was a demon, a force of nature that spared none who resisted. Yet beneath the armor, Genghis Khan was human. He wept for fallen sons, trusted his wife's counsel, and carried the scars of a brutal youth. His laws protected the weak, banned theft among his own, and demanded unity. Was he a tyrant or a unifier? The answer eluded even those closest to him. As his empire grew, so did his burdens. Each victory brought new lands to govern, new rebellions to crush. His sons jostled for power, their rivalries threatening to fracture what he had built. And age crept upon him, his body slowing even as his mind burned bright. In 1227, he launched one last campaign against the Tangut, rebels who dared defy him. What would this final ride reveal about the man who conquered the world? The end of an era. The Tangut campaign was grueling. The Mongols rust cities, their arrows singing through the air. But Genghis Khan, now in his 60s, faltered. Some say he fell from his horse. Others whisper of a wound festering in secret. As his army closed in on victory, he grew ill, his breath shallow. He summoned his sons, Yochi, Chagatai, Ogadai, Tolui, and his generals, dividing his empire with a steady hand. "Conquer the world," he commanded, his voice a fading echo. On August 18th, 1227, he died, his eyes locked on the endless steppe. His death was cloaked in mystery. His body vanished, just buried in a tomb known only to a few. Legend says his guards killed all who saw the procession, then themselves, sealing the secret forever. His empire lived on, stretching further under his heirs, from Russia to Korea. His blood runs in millions today, his laws shaping history. Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor who shaped Europe. In the turbulent aftermath of the French Revolution, a figure emerged whose ambition and genius would reshape the continent. Napoleon Bonaparte, born on the rugged island of Corsica in 1769, was a man of contradictions, a soldier and a statesman, a visionary and a tyrant. His rise from obscurity to the heights of power is a tale of relentless drive, strategic brilliance, and a vision that stretched far beyond the battlefield. This chapter delves into the heart of his reign, where his dreams of empire collided with the harsh realities of war and politics. From artillery officer to general. Napoleon's ascent began in the chaos of revolutionary France. At 24, he was a mere artillery captain, but his keen mind and unyielding spirit set him apart. In 1793, he seized his moment at the siege of Toulon, where his daring plan to capture a key fort turned the tide against the British. His reward was swift promotion to brigadier general. But Toulon was just the beginning. As France teetered on the brink of civil war, Napoleon's star rose higher. In 1795, he crushed a royalist uprising in Paris with a whiff of grapeshot, his cannons clearing the streets in minutes. The Directory, France's ruling body, took notice. They gave him command of the Army of Italy, a ragged force facing the might of Austria. What could a young Corsican do against such odds? The Italian campaign. A legend is born. In 1796, Napoleon arrived in Italy, his troops weary and unpaid. He stood before them, his voice cutting through the doubt. Soldiers, you are hungry and naked. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. His promise was not empty. With lightning speed, he outmaneuvered the Austrians, winning battle after battle, Lodi, Arcole, Rivoli. His tactics were revolutionary: rapid marches, concentrated firepower, and an uncanny ability to read the enemy's mind. By 1797, he had forced Austria to the negotiating table, dictating terms that redrew the map of Europe. His fame soared, and Paris hailed him as a hero. But Napoleon's ambition was a restless beast. He dreamed of conquests far beyond Italy's borders. In 1798, he set sail for Egypt, aiming to disrupt British trade and perhaps carve out an empire in the East. What awaited him in the land of the pharaohs, Egypt, and the road to power? The Egyptian campaign was a mix of triumph and disaster. Napoleon's forces routed the Mamluks at the Battle of the Pyramids, his words ringing out, "Soldiers, 40 centuries look down upon you." He brought scholars to study the ancient wonders, unearthing the Rosetta Stone. But the British Navy under Nelson shattered his fleet at the Nile, trapping him in Egypt. Undeterred, Napoleon returned to France in 1799, leaving his army behind. Paris was in turmoil, the Directory crumbling. Seizing the moment, he staged a coup on 18 Brumaire, becoming first consul. At 30, he was the master of France, but power, once tasted, demanded more. In 1704, he crowned himself emperor, his hands placing the laurel wreath upon his own head. The Republic was dead. The empire had begun. What would this self-made sovereign do with his newfound throne? The Napoleonic Wars, Europe in flames. Napoleon's reign was a whirlwind of war and reform. He centralized power, reformed the legal system with the Napoleonic Code, and spread his vision of order across Europe. But his ambitions clashed with the old monarchies. In 1805, he faced the Third Coalition, Austria, Russia, and Britain. At Austerlitz, he lured the Austro-Russian army into a trap, his forces striking like a hammer. The battle was a masterpiece, earning him the title God of War. Yet victory bred defiance. In 1706, Prussia joined the fray, only to be crushed at Jena and Auerstedt. Berlin fell, and Napoleon marched through its gates. He turned to Russia next, meeting Tsar Alexander I at Tilsit in 1807. There, on a raft in the Niemen River, they forged an uneasy alliance. But peace was a mirage. In 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia with 600,000 men, the largest army the world had ever seen. What folly led him to this frozen abyss? The Russian catastrophe. The march to Moscow was a descent into hell. The Russians retreated, scorching the earth behind them. Napoleon's supply lines stretched thin, his men starving. He reached Moscow in September, only to find it ablaze, set afire by its own people. With winter closing in, he turned back, his Grande Armée disintegrating in the snow. Frostbite, hunger, and Cossack raids claimed hundreds of thousands. By December, only 40,000 staggered home. It was a defeat from which he would never recover. Europe's smelled blood. In 1813, a coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Sweden converged at Leipzig. The Battle of Nations raged for 3 days, the coalition's numbers overwhelming. Napoleon retreated to France, his empire crumbling. In 1814, Paris fell, and he abdicated, exiled to the tiny island of Elba. But could a man like Napoleon be contained? The 100 Days and Waterloo. In 1815, he escaped, landing in France to cheers of Vive l'Empereur. His old soldiers flocked to him, and he marched on Paris, reclaiming his throne. Europe recoiled, marshaling its forces for one final stand. At Waterloo, on June 18th, 1815, he faced the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian army under Blücher. The battle was a brutal slog. Rain-soaked fields churned to mud. Napoleon's attacks faltered, and as the Prussians arrived, his lines broke. It was over. Exiled again, this time to St. Helena, a speck in the Atlantic, Napoleon lived out his days in isolation. He dictated his memoirs, his mind still sharp, his spirit defiant. On May 5th, 1821, he died, his last words a murmur. France, the army, Josephine. His body was buried under a willow, but his legend refused to rest. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the Sword of Allah. In the annals of military history, few names shine as brightly as that of Khalid ibn al-Walid. Born into the powerful Quraysh tribe of Mecca, he was destined for greatness, but his path would take him from fierce opposition to Islam to becoming one of its most formidable champions. Known as the Sword of Allah, Khalid's tactical genius and unwavering faith led him to victory in over 100 battles, earning him a place among the greatest military leaders of all time. This is the story of a man whose life was a testament to courage, strategy, and devotion, a tale that unfolds like the desert sands, vast and unyielding. A warrior's first battle. The sun hung low over the rugged hills of Uhud, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of sweat and blood. Khalid ibn al-Walid, mounted on his steed, surveyed the chaos with a keen eye. He saw the Muslim archers abandoning their post on the hill, lured by the promise of loot. A smile tugged at his lips. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With a shout, he spurred his horse forward, leading his cavalry in a thunderous charge around the flank. The Muslims, caught off guard, scrambled to reform their lines, but it was too late. Khalid's forces crashed into them like a tidal wave, turning the tide of battle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, victory belonged to the Quraysh. But for Khalid, this triumph was bittersweet, for it set him on a path he could never have imagined. Years earlier, in the bustling city of Mecca, a boy was born into the powerful Banu Makhzum clan. His name was Khalid, son of al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, a respected leader among the Quraysh. From a young age, Khalid was trained in the arts of war and horsemanship, skills that would serve him well in the turbulent times ahead. The elders spoke of his potential, but none could foresee the heights he would reach. As Islam began to spread in Mecca, Khalid's family stood firmly against the new faith. He fought alongside his kin in the Battle of Badr, where the Muslims achieved a surprising victory. But it was after the Battle of Uhud that Khalid's heart began to stir. He witnessed the unwavering faith of the Muslims, even in defeat, and something within him shifted. In 629 AD, he made the momentous decision to embrace Islam, pledging his sword to the Prophet Muhammad, the sword unsheathed. Under the banner of Islam, Khalid's tactical genius flourished. He led the Muslim forces in the conquest of Mecca, where his strategic planning ensured a bloodless victory. The city that had once opposed him now welcomed him as a liberator. He then turned his attention to the Byzantine Empire, scoring a decisive win at the Battle of Mu'tah, despite being outnumbered. His reputation grew, and the Prophet himself bestowed upon him the title Saifullah, the sword of Allah. But Khalid's greatest challenges lay ahead, as the Muslim community faced internal strife and external threats. After the Prophet's death, many tribes renounced Islam, leading to the Ridda Wars. Khalid, now a key commander under Caliph Abu Bakr, swiftly quelled these rebellions. His campaigns were marked by both military prowess and mercy, as he sought to bring the apostates back into the fold. At the Battle of Yamama, he faced the false prophet Musaylima, whose forces outnumbered the Muslims. Khalid's strategy was bold. He divided his army into smaller units, creating the illusions of greater numbers. The ruse worked, and Musaylima's forces were routed. Khalid's victory secured the Arabian Peninsula for Islam, but his gaze soon turned to the mighty empires beyond, the conquest of empires. With the ascension of Caliph Umar, Khalid's military career reached new heights. In 634 AD, he led the Muslim forces into Iraq, where he faced the Sassanid Persians at the Battle of the Bridge. Despite initial setbacks, Khalid regrouped and launched a daring night attack, scattering the Persian army. His conquests continued, but it was in Syria that he would face his greatest test. The Byzantine Empire, a formidable foe, amassed a massive army to crush the Muslim advance. At the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 AD, Khalid found himself outnumbered nearly 10-1. The odds seemed insurmountable, but Khalid was undeterred. He employed brilliant tactics, including feigned retreats and coordinated cavalry charges, to disrupt the Byzantine formations. For 6 days, the battle raged, the clash of steel and the cries of warriors filling the air. On the final day, Khalid executed a masterful encirclement, cutting off the enemy's retreat. The Byzantines were routed, their army shattered, and Syria fell into Muslim hands. It was a victory that would echo through history, cementing Khalid's legacy as a military genius. Yet even in triumph, his journey was not without controversy. The price of greatness. Despite his unparalleled success, Khalid's fame and influence grew too great for some. In 638 AD, Caliph Umar relieved him of his command, citing the need to show that victory came from Allah, not from any one man. The decision shocked many, but Khalid accepted it with humility, stepping down without protest. He continued to serve as a soldier, fighting in the front lines until his retirement. In his later years, he settled in Homs, Syria, where he lived a quiet life, far from the clamor of battle. He passed away in 642 AD, his body laid to rest in a simple grave, but his spirit lived on in the annals of history. Khalid ibn al-Walid's life was a testament to the power of faith, strategy, and unwavering resolve. His battles were not just fought with swords, but with intellect and conviction. He remains a figure of inspiration, his strategies studied by military leaders across the ages. As the winds of time blow across the deserts he once traversed, his legacy endures, a reminder that true greatness lies not in power alone, but in the service of something greater. Erwin Rommel. The Desert Fox's Final Stand. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dunes of North Africa. Erwin Rommel, the man they called the Desert Fox, stood at a crossroads in 1942. His Africa Corps had danced across the sands, outwitting the British at every turn, but the tide of war was shifting. Supplies dwindled, men grew weary, and a new adversary loomed, General Bernard Montgomery, a meticulous planner with an army swelling in strength. This chapter of Rommel's tale is one of defiance, desperation, and the unraveling of a legend. What would become of the fox when the desert turned against him? The sands of El Alamein. Rommel's genius had always been in motion, blitzkrieg tactics that struck like lightning, leaving foes scrambling in the dust. But by October 1942, the game had changed. At El Alamein, the British Eighth Army dug in, their lines bristling with artillery and fresh American tanks. Rommel's forces, stretched thin across 1,000 miles of supply lines, faced an enemy that outnumbered them 2-1. He knew the odds, yet he pressed forward, his mind racing for a way to turn the tables. The battle began with a thunderous barrage, Montgomery's guns lighting up the night sky. Rommel countered with his signature flare, probing for weak points, sending his panzers darting through the chaos. But the Allies held firm, their defenses a wall of steel and resolve. Fuel ran low, tank after tank sputtered to a halt, and the Africa Corps faltered. For days the two armies clashed, the desert swallowing the fallen. Rommel fought with every ounce of his cunning, but the weight of numbers crushed his hopes. What did it feel like to see his invincible aura slip away? A leader under strain. Even as defeat loomed, Rommel refused to break. He roamed the front lines, his goggles caked with sand, barking orders and rallying his men. "We fight to the last bullet," he told them, his voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into his face. His soldiers adored him. Here was a general who shared their rations, who braved the same dangers. But beneath the bravado, Cracks appeared. Sleepless nights and the strain of command took their toll. His health began to fail, his hands trembling from fatigue. Back in Germany, his wife Lucy and son Manfred waited anxiously, their letters a lifeline to the world beyond the war. Rommel wrote to them of the desert's beauty, its endless skies, but never of the despair gnawing at him. He was a man torn, loyal to his country, yet increasingly aware of the madness driving it. The Nazi leadership demanded victory, but offered no support. How long could he carry the weight of their delusions? Retreat and reflection. El Alamein marked the beginning of the end. On November 4th, 1942, Rommel ordered a retreat, defying Hitler's command to stand and die. It was a bitter pill, his first major loss, but he saved his men from annihilation. The Afrika Korps fell back across Libya, harried by Montgomery's pursuit. Rommel's mind churned with what-ifs, more supplies, more time, a different strategy. Yet deep down, he knew the war's momentum had shifted beyond his control. Recalled to Germany in early 1943, he arrived a shadow of the Desert Fox. His superiors praised his efforts, but whispers of failure followed him. Hitler, ever erratic, still saw value in Rommel's name, appointing him to oversee the Atlantic Wall, the Reich's defense against an Allied invasion. Rommel threw himself into the task, fortifying beaches with mines and obstacles, but his heart wasn't in it. He sensed the end approaching, not just for him, but for Germany itself. What did he see in those gray waves crashing against the shore? A dangerous disillusionment. The war's brutality weighed heavier with each passing day. Reports of atrocities in the east reached Rommel, massacres, camps, a Reich spiraling into darkness. He was no Nazi, never had been. He'd fought for Germany, not the party, and the distinction mattered to him. In quiet moments, he questioned his role. Had his victories propped up a regime he despised? His refusal to execute prisoners or enforce Hitler's racial edicts had long irked Berlin, but now his dissent grew bolder. By 1944, Rommel's name surfaced among a group of officers plotting to end the madness. They sought his support, not to kill Hitler outright, but to force a surrender, to save what was left of their nation. Rommel hesitated. He was a soldier, not a conspirator, yet the idea lingered. What if peace could be won without more bloodshed? The plot crystallized on July 20th, 1944, when a bomb exploded at Hitler's headquarters. It failed, and the fallout was swift. Rommel, though not directly involved, was implicated by association. How would the fox escape this trap? The final choice. On October 14th, 1944, two officers arrived at Rommel's home in Herrlingen. The Gestapo had evidence, testimony linking him to the plot. Hitler, wary of making a martyr of a national hero, offered a grim deal: take poison and be buried with honors, or face a public trial that would destroy his family. Rommel stood in his study, gazing at a photo of Lucy and Manfred. He made his choice in silence. He donned his uniform, kissed his wife goodbye, and stepped into the car. Minutes later, he swallowed the cyanide, his body slumping against the seat. The Nazis spun a lie, death by heart attack, and staged a lavish funeral. But the truth seeped out, a whisper among the ruins. Rommel, the brilliant tactician, the reluctant rebel, was gone. What might he have done if fate had dealt a different hand? Echoes in the dust. Rommel's story doesn't end with his death. His tactics, speed, surprise, adaptability live on in military doctrine, studied by generals and scholars alike. Yet his legacy is a puzzle. Was he a hero, a villain, or a man caught in history's grip? In Germany, he's remembered as a patriot. Elsewhere, as a cog in a war machine. The desert he once mastered holds no answers, its sands silent over the graves of his men. His life challenges us to ask, what does it mean to serve with honor in a dishonorable cause? As the war faded into memory, Rommel's name endured, a beacon of brilliance, a shadow of regret. His tale is a thread in the tapestry of history, pulling us in, urging us to unravel its knots. What secrets lie buried with the desert fox, waiting for us to find? Vo Nguyen Giap, the architect of Vietnam's victory. In the tapestry of Vietnam's history, few threads shine as brightly as the life of General Vo Nguyen Giap. A man of humble origins, he rose to become one of the greatest military minds of the 20th century, a strategist whose victories against colonial powers and superpowers alike reshaped the fate of his nation. His story is one of intellect, sacrifice, and an unyielding commitment to freedom, a journey that winds through the rugged landscapes of Vietnam, revealing a leader who turned peasants into warriors and dreams into reality, from village scholar to revolutionary firebrand. Imagine a quiet village in Quang Binh province, where in 1911 Vo Nguyen Giap entered the world as the son of a rice farmer and scholar. His father, a man of learning despite his modest means, taught Giap the value of knowledge and the sting of injustice under French colonial rule. As a boy, Giap watched his people toil under foreign dominion, their voices silenced, their futures stolen. That spark of defiance ignited early. By 14, he was already joining clandestine nationalist groups, whispering of a Vietnam unshackled. At 18, Giap arrived in Hanoi, enrolling in the elite Lycée Albert Sarraute. There, his mind drank deeply from the wells of history and philosophy, studying the campaigns of Napoleon and the wisdom of Sun Tzu. But it was the revolutionary ideas of Marx and Lenin that truly captivated him. In 1930, he joined the Communist Party of Vietnam, a decision that set him on a collision course with the colonial regime. Arrested that same year for organizing protests, he tasted the bitterness of imprisonment. Released after 2 years, he emerged not diminished, but resolute. What trials would this young dreamer face next? A life forged in fire. Giap's path grew steeper as the 1930s unfolded. He earned a law degree, balancing his studies with underground activism, but his heart belonged to the struggle. It was during this time that he met Ho Chi Minh, the soul of Vietnam's independence movement. Under Ho's mentorship, Giap's vision sharpened. He saw a nation rising from the ashes of oppression, but personal loss soon tested his spirit. In 1940, his wife, Quang Thai, was seized by the French and died in captivity, leaving Giap to raise their daughter alone. Grief became his forge, tempering his resolve. Fleeing to China with Ho Chi Minh, Giap turned exile into opportunity. As World War II engulfed the globe, he studied guerrilla warfare, drawing lessons from Mao Zedong and crafting a strategy suited to Vietnam's terrain and spirit. He trained a small band of fighters, their numbers few but their determination vast. When Japan's defeat in 1945 opened a window for Vietnam's independence, Giap returned ready to lead. But the French, unwilling to relinquish their colony, loomed on the horizon. How would this fledgling commander confront such a foe? Dien Bien Phu, the triumph that shook the world. The First Indochina War pitted Giap's Viet Minh against a French army steeped in tradition and firepower. Outmatched in resources, Giap leaned on ingenuity. His forces struck like shadows, ambushing supply lines and vanishing into the jungle. Years of grueling conflict led to 1954, when the French made a fatal misstep at Dien Bien Phu. Nestled in a valley, their fortified base was a challenge Giap could not resist. What followed was a marvel of determination. Giap's troops, farmers and villagers, dragged heavy artillery through mountains and forests, a task deemed impossible by Western observers. When the siege began, his cannons thundered from concealed ridges, catching the French off guard. For 55 days, the battle raged, a brutal ballet of strategy and sacrifice. On May 7th, 1954, the French flag fell, and with it, their colonial empire in Indochina crumbled. The victory at Dien Bien Phu was more than a military feat. It was a beacon to colonized peoples everywhere. Yet as the dust settled, what new challenges awaited? The Vietnam War, outlasting the giant. The Geneva Accords split Vietnam in two, but the peace was a mirage. By the 1960s, the United States stepped in, determined to halt communism's spread. Giap, now commanding the North Vietnamese army, faced an enemy unlike any before: advanced technology, endless resources, and a global reach. Undeterred, he adapted. His philosophy was clear. Victory required not domination, but endurance. He would bleed the enemy's will, not just their ranks. In 1968, Giap unleashed the Tet Offensive, a daring assault across South Vietnam. Cities burned, bases fell, and though the cost was steep, the impact was seismic. American televisions beamed images of chaos, sowing doubt in a war-weary public. Giap's troops fought on, their tunnels and traps confounding U.S. forces. Year by year, the tide turned, not through decisive battles, but through relentless pressure. In 1973, America withdrew. In 1975, Saigon fell. Giap had outlasted the giant, but at what price to his people? A legacy beyond the battlefield. In his later years, Giap stepped back from command, turning to writing and reflection. His books on warfare became required reading for military minds worldwide, blending theory with the lessons of his life. He lived to 102, passing in 2013, a revered figure whose name still stirs pride in Vietnam. Giap was a paradox, a scholar who wielded armies, a communist admired by capitalists for his brilliance. Vo Nguyen Giap's story is one of a man who saw beyond the horizon, who turned weakness into strength and despair into hope. His victories were not just for Vietnam, but for all who dare to defy the odds. As his tale fades into the night, it leaves a question hanging in the air. What does it truly mean to fight for freedom? Saladin, the Lion of Islam. In the sun-scorched lands of the Levant, where empires clashed and faiths collided, one man rose to become a legend. Saladin, known to the West as the noble foe of the Crusaders, was a leader whose name echoed through the halls of history. Born into a world of turmoil, he would unite a fractured Muslim world, reclaim Jerusalem, and earn the respect of his enemies. His story is one of wisdom, valor, and a vision that transcended the battlefield, a tale that unfolds like the desert winds, carrying whispers of a time when honor meant more than victory. A boy in the shadow of war. Picture a bustling marketplace in Tikrit, a city nestled along the Tigris River. It was here in 1137 that Yusuf ibn Ayyub, later known as Saladin, was born to a Kurdish family of modest means. His father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, was a soldier, his life tied to the fortunes of war. As a child, Saladin listened to tales of battles and heroes, his eyes wide with wonder. But the world outside was harsh. Seljuk Turks, Fatimid caliphs, and Crusader knights vied for control, their ambitions carving scars across the land. At 14, Saladin's life took a turn. His uncle Shirkuh, a fierce warrior, took him under his wing, teaching him the arts of sword and strategy. They journeyed to Damascus, a city of scholars and spies, where Saladin's mind sharpened like a blade. He studied theology, poetry, and the Quran, his faith deepening with each passing day. But it was the call of duty that would shape his destiny. In 1164, Shirkuh led an expedition to Egypt, and Saladin, now 27, rode beside him. What awaited him in the land of the pharaohs? The rise of a leader. Egypt was a prize coveted by many. The Fatimid Caliphate, weakened by internal strife, faced threats from Crusader states and rival Muslim factions. Shirkuh's forces clashed with both, and in the heat of battle, Saladin's courage shone. At the siege of Alexandria, he held the city against overwhelming odds, his resolve a beacon for his men. When Shirkuh died suddenly in 1169, the caliph appointed Saladin as vizier, a position of immense power. But Saladin was not content to rule in another's name. In 1171, he abolished the Fatimid Caliphate, uniting Egypt under the banner of Sunni Islam. His vision stretched beyond the Nile. He dreamed of a Muslim world standing strong against the Crusader kingdoms. With Egypt as his base, he set out to forge alliances, his diplomacy as sharp as his sword. By 1183, he had brought Aleppo and Mosul under his sway, his influence spreading like the roots of an ancient tree. But the greatest challenge lay ahead. What would it take to reclaim the holy city of Jerusalem? The Battle of Hattin, a turning point. The Crusader states, entrenched in the Levant, held Jerusalem as their crown jewel. King Guy of Jerusalem, backed by the fiery Reynold of Chatillon, raided Muslim caravans and mocked Saladin's calls for peace. In 1187, Saladin's patience snapped. He gathered an army of 30,000, a coalition of warriors from across the Muslim world, and marched toward the Crusader stronghold at Tiberias. The Crusaders, overconfident, met him at the Horns of Hattin, a parched plateau under a merciless sun. Saladin, ever the tactician, cut off their water supply, his archers raining arrows like a storm. As the Crusaders faltered, his cavalry charged, shattering their lines. King Guy was captured, and Reynold, the provocateur, met his end at Saladin's own hand. The victory was total. The road to Jerusalem lay open. But how would Saladin treat the city he had fought so hard to reclaim? The fall of Jerusalem and a noble heart. In October 1187, after a brief siege, Jerusalem surrendered. The contrast to the Crusaders' bloody conquest 88 years earlier was stark. Saladin, true to his faith, offered mercy. He allowed Christians to leave unharmed, their dignity intact, and protected the holy sites of all religions. His generosity stunned even his foes, Tales of his kindness spread across Europe, painting him as a chivalrous adversary. But the fall of Jerusalem sent shockwaves through Christendom. Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade, and soon Richard the Lionheart of England set sail, his heart set on reclaiming the Holy City. The stage was set for an epic clash of titans. What would happen when these two legends met on the battlefield? The Lionheart and the Sultan. The Third Crusade was a duel of wits and wills. Richard, a warrior king with a flair for drama, landed in Acre in 1191, his forces bolstered by French and German knights. Saladin, now in his 50s, faced a formidable opponent. At Arsuf, Richard's disciplined infantry repelled Saladin's cavalry, a rare setback for the Sultan. Yet Saladin's strategy was patience. He harassed supply lines, avoided pitched battles, and waited for the Crusaders to tire. The two leaders never met face to face, but their respect grew. They exchanged gifts. Richard sent fruit and ice to cool Saladin's fevers, while Saladin offered horses and falcons. In 1292, they agreed to a truce. Jerusalem would remain Muslim, but Christian pilgrims could visit freely. It was a compromise, but one that spoke to Saladin's pragmatism and honor. What did this peace mean for the man who had dedicated his life to jihad? The final chapter and a lasting legacy. Saladin returned to Damascus, his health failing after years of campaigning. On March 4th, 1193, he died, his body wrapped in a simple shroud. His treasury was nearly empty. His wealth had been spent on charity and the welfare of his people. He was buried in a modest tomb, a far cry from the grandeur of his life. But Saladin's legacy was anything but modest. He united a fractured Muslim world, reclaimed Jerusalem, and set a standard for leadership that transcended faith and time. His name became a symbol of justice and chivalry, admired by friend and foe alike. Even today, his story challenges us to look beyond the sword, to see the man who wielded it with wisdom and grace. What can we learn from the lion who roared not just for conquest, but for a better world? Admiral Yi Sun Sin, the eternal flame of Korea. In the vast tapestry of history, few threads burn as brightly as the legacy of Admiral Yi Sun Sin, Korea's unyielding naval hero. His name evokes images of roaring seas, ironclad ships, and a spirit that refused to bow before any storm. As we reach the final chapter of this series, we'll sail through the defining moments of his life, his breathtaking victories, his relentless determination, and the ultimate sacrifice that sealed his legend. This is not just a tale of war, but a story of a man who became the soul of a nation. So stay with us, dear listener, as we uncover the end of Yi Sun Sin's extraordinary journey, from humble roots to the helm. Born in 1545 in Seoul, Yi Sun Sin's early life offered little hint of the titan he would become. Raised in a modest family, he immersed himself in military strategy and Confucian ideals, his sharp mind cutting through the complexities of both books and battlefields. Yet his rise was no smooth ascent. Political rivals and court intrigues shadowed his career, testing his patience and resolve. In 1591, fate called him to the Jeolla Left Naval District, a post that would thrust him into the heart of the Imjin War, a conflict that pitted Korea against the formidable might of Japan. What lay ahead was a test no ordinary man could endure. But Yi Sun Sin was no ordinary man. The genius of the turtle ship. Imagine a vessel unlike any other. A warship clad in iron, its spiked roof glinting under the sun, cannons bristling from its sides. This was the Jeobuxion, the turtle ship, Yi Sun Sin's brainchild, and a revolution in naval warfare. With its ability to ram enemy ships and withstand their volleys, it was a floating fortress, a symbol of Korean defiance. In 1592, at the Battle of Okpo, Yi unleashed these marvels upon the unsuspecting Japanese fleet. The enemy, accustomed to dominating the seas, watched in horror as their ships splintered and sank beneath the turtle ship's relentless assault. It was a stunning debut, but only a prelude to the miracles yet to come. What drove Yi to craft such a weapon? Was it desperation, brilliance, or both? Myeongyang, the miracle in the strait. Fast forward to 1597, and Yi Sun Sin's world had darkened. Betrayed by jealous officials, stripped of his rank, and nearly executed, he was a man brought low until Korea's desperate hour called him back. With just 13 ships, he faced a Japanese armada of over 300 at the Battle of Myeongyang. The odds were laughable, the situation dire. Yet Yi saw opportunity where others saw doom. He chose the narrow Myeongyang Strait, its wild currents a hidden ally. As the enemy advanced, he stood resolute, his voice ringing out, "Those who seek death shall live, those who seek life shall die." What followed was a masterstroke. Luring the Japanese into the strait, Yi turned nature against them. The churning waters disrupted their lines, leaving them vulnerable. His tiny fleet struck with ferocity, cannons blazing, arrows flying, until the sea ran red with the wreckage of over 30 enemy ships. The rest fled, their confidence shattered. Myeongyang wasn't just a victory, it was a miracle, a testament to a leader who could bend fate itself. But how did he summon such courage? The answer lies in a heart forged by loyalty and an unshakable belief in his cause. Noryang, the final stand. The war's endgame arrived in 1598 at the Battle of Noryang. Allied with Ming China, Yi aimed to crush a retreating Japanese fleet, severing their escape. The night was alive with fire and thunder as ships clashed in a brutal dance of destruction. Victory was near, so close you could taste it, when a single bullet pierced the chaos and struck Yi Sun Sin. Mortally wounded, he refused to falter. "The battle is at its height," he whispered to his son and nephew. "Do not announce my death." With his final breath, he ensured triumph, dying as he lived, for Korea. Noryang was a decisive blow, effectively ending the Imjin War. The cost was immense, but the reward was freedom. Yi Sun Sin's body was gone, but his spirit lingered in every wave that lapped Korea's shores. Did he know in that fleeting moment that his name would echo forever? A legacy carved in time. Admiral Yi Sun Sin was more than a warrior. He was a visionary. His turtle ships reshaped naval strategy. His diaries revealed a mind both tactical and tender, and his resolve inspired a nation to rise from ashes. Statues stand tall in his honor, from Seoul to the coast, while his words and deeds live on in Korean culture. He taught us that greatness isn't measured by the absence of fear, but by the courage to face it. His life asks us, what would you fight for even when all hope seems lost? As we close this series on history's greatest military minds, we leave you with Yi Sun Sin's story, a beacon of resilience and sacrifice. From the deserts of Persia to the seas of Korea, these legends have guided us through the ages. And now, dear listener, As the night wraps you in its quiet embrace, we bid you farewell. May ye sun sin's valor light your dreams, and may you rest well under the watchful stars of history's heroes. Good night.